Hey everybody, it's Aaron at Warmoth, and today I'm going to give you all the information you need to choose the correct Floyd Rose nut for your next build, so stick around. So the Floyd Rose system is a little daunting to the uninitiated. I've done a bunch of videos on it in the past, and I figured it was time for another one. And this time I'm going to focus exclusively on choosing the correct nut, how to mount it, and choosing the correct Warmoth option for the nut that you want and how you want to mount it. So let's start with the nuts. Floyd Rose nuts, their models all start with either an R or an L, which denotes right or left-handed. And then that is followed by a number, either a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5. They have a couple other numbers, but we're not going to worry about those today. Those are kind of specialty things. 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the main ones that we use. And those refer to nut width and or string spacing. So the number 2 is a 1 5/8 inch nut width. Number 3 is a 1 11/16 inch nut width with narrow string spacing. 4 is a 1 11/16 inch nut width with standard string spacing. And the 5 is a 1 3/4 inch nut width. So in some cases, it's fairly obvious what you want to choose. If you have a left-handed neck with a 1 5/8 inch nut width, then you want to pick an L2. If you have a right-handed neck with 1 3/4 inch nut width, then you want to pick an R5. Where it gets a little tricky is the 2 in the middle, the 3 and the 4. They're both for a 1 11/16 inch nut width. And which one you should choose kind of depends on how you like your neck to feel. Me, I always go for the 3. It's basically a 1 11/16 inch nut width with 1 5/8 inch string spacing. So the strings are a little more narrower spaced, and I find that it gives me a little bit of wiggle room down the edge of the neck, so it's not so easy to pull a string off the neck when you're fretting. And I just like that extra clearance along the side of the neck. But other people prefer the standard string spacing, and so they go for the 4. It really just depends on your preference. And some of you may be asking right now, well, what about 1.650 nut width? And Warmoth doesn't offer that as a standard option, but we will do it as an off-menu option. For that nut width, you should choose the 2, the 1 5/8 inch nut. And when you mount it, there's going to be a little ledge there because the wood, the physical wood of your neck is a tiny bit wider than the nut itself, but it will work. It's done all the time. In fact, I have a guitar right here. It's not a Warmoth, but I have this ESP right here that does just that. It's a 1.650 nut width with an R2 nut, and you can feel there's a little bit of a ledge right there, but it works just fine. People do that all the time. So now let's talk about radius. All Floyd Rose nuts have a 10-inch radius. In one of my previous videos, I mentioned that one of the nuts had a 12-inch radius. That is no longer the case. That video is many years old at this point. All Floyd Rose nuts have a 10-inch radius, so they're going to work perfectly on a 10-inch radius neck, or like a 10 to 16-inch compound radius neck. They're going to work fine. But they will really work fine on any radius between like 9 and 12 inches. It's not that critical that you match it perfectly. In fact, this guitar and every Warmoth guitar that I have with a Floyd nut on it, they all have 12-inch straight radius. That's my preferred radius of choice. That's what this has, and it works just fine. So anything between 9 and 12 is going to be fine. You're not going to feel anything crazy that's going to, drive you nuts. So now let's talk about how they are mounted. You can mount a Floyd Rose nut in one of 2 ways. You can either mount it with wood screws from the top, which is how this ESP is. If you look on the back, there's no holes or anything on the back. I also have this Ibanez JS2540, and it's the same deal. It's got the Floyd Rose nut on the front, but there are no holes on the back. It's mounted with the wood screws from the top. So that's one way you can mount it. Then you can mount it with 2 machined bolts. You can see it looks the same on the top, but on the back, you can see that there are holes in the back of the neck, and they're actually machined bolts that go right through the neck and screw into the nut itself. And that's the case on this Warmoth. And then, of course, this Warmoth is the same way. It's got those machined bolts that come through the back of the neck. And again, which way that you choose is kind of up to you. I spoke to Ken Warmoth about this several times, and he felt that this way, with the bolts coming through the back of the neck, he felt that way was superior. He said that when you use wood screws mounted from the top, over time, you know, you're using the bar and you're changing the tension of those strings all the time. And he says that back and forth action is eventually going to work the nut loose if all you're using is wood screws. Now, as I've already showed you, I have 2 guitars from other manufacturers that I've played. I haven't had the Satriani model for very long, but I've had that ESP for a decade, and I've gigged with it a bunch, and I have not noticed any play in that nut at all. It is still just as rock solid as the day I bought it. So I haven't experienced that myself, but Ken Warmoth was very adamant about that. He did not like that mounting system, and so Warmoth does not drill holes for those wood screws. So let's talk about that now. Let's talk about which Warmoth option you should select. Warmoth offers 2 options. We do a Floyd Rose Prep, and we do a Floyd Rose Prep shelf only. So if you want to mount your Floyd with the bolts coming through the neck, you're going to get the Floyd Rose Prep. If you want to use the 2 wood screws from the top, you want to get the Floyd Rose Prep shelf only. And that way you can drill the holes for the wood screws yourself. I guess I'm going to remain uncommitted about which is better, because again, I have guitars both ways and I've never had a problem with either. So it'll be up to you to decide which option you should select. Now, there is one last thing that I want to mention about Floyd Rose nuts, and that is the length of the shelf that they sit on. If you build a custom neck from Warmoth, and we're starting it from the ground up knowing that it's going to have a Floyd Rose nut on it, we will cut that shelf so that it fits the nut perfectly. However, if you select one from the showcase that's already been cut for a standard nut and you say, no, I want a Floyd shelf on that instead, well, at that point, we've already cut this radius that comes up from the headstock. And on a standard nut, that radius comes in a little closer to the fretboard. So if you want us then to put that Floyd shelf on it, the shelf isn't going to quite come to the end of the nut. The nut is going to hang over in space just a tiny bit there. And that's fine. We've sold thousands and thousands of necks that way. In fact, I own some. They work just fine. They're totally stable. There's nothing wrong with them, but there is that visual thing there. If that's going to bother you, then don't order one from the showcase. Just order one custom built, and it'll take a little longer to get to you, but it will be exactly the way you want it. And that is everything I can think of to tell you about Floyd Rose nuts, how they're mounted, which Warmoth options you should choose. There's probably more information and exact dimensions on the website if you want to check that out. Of course, you can always give our customer service reps a call. They love to talk about guitar stuff. And that's it. Until next time, keep on picking.